All right, let's get into this review of On Guard. So, do you ever play a game? You sit down and you go, you know what? It's got some pretty good moments, but it just sometimes misses the mark. And that's what we have here. On Guard is a fairly simple game to get your head around. It's very combat focused. The story is very light, but very goofy. It's constantly got a lot of action that it's throwing at you, and slight elements of platforming that are weaved within the gameplay. But it stays very simple throughout, and we'll get into that as we talk about the review in more detail, but starting right off the bat, the game was overall pretty okay. Nothing wowed me, nothing was insane, or nothing was actually terrible either. It was very middle of the road, but that's not always bad. So let's get started with the overview of things. So, On Guard, and sort of the reason why I was interested in playing this in the first place is because, as I said in the preview, I saw it in an Iron Pineapple video a while ago. Now, he constantly goes through and looks at anything that is a Souls-like game, and of course this game has third-person combat with a dodge roll and a parry mechanic, and that kind of makes it a Souls-like to him. So he tried it out, and it looked pretty interesting. As of today, you can get the game for $7.99 on Steam. It is on sale. I would say that is a good price for it. I beat the game in about 3 hours flat, and I would say that anything $10 or less in this game is probably worth it, unless you just really want to try an indie game that doesn't do anything super impressive. Normally the game is priced at $20, which I think is a little high for this, but overall, not terrible. Pricing's pretty good overall. And I think I've constantly seen this game on sale, so just try and grab it when it is on a little sale, or buy it at full price if you really want to support the indie developers. The story of this game is, well, there isn't a ton of it. So your main character is going through these very narrow hallways in this city, and then later on through a little bit of a castle area with interior zones, and then through a kind of broken fortress. But through that, you're just kind of chasing down someone that you're trying to find for whatever reason. So because this game is so short, I'm not going to spoil any of the story elements, even though they're very light, but just know they're very lighthearted in the first place. There's nothing too demanding of you to understand here. Just know that you've got a reason to go there, and you've got a reason to fight all these bad guys. But the story is presented in such a lighthearted manner. It's fun, it's goofy, it's not meant to be serious, but it is meant to be engaging to a degree. Nothing about it grabbed me a ton, but nothing just made me get turned away either. It was serviceable, we'll say. And then getting onto the gameplay. Now, gameplay here is king. It's what it was made for. It's like the developer of this game went through and came up with the idea of fencing and then created an entire game around it, which it accomplished pretty well. I think that if this game had a bit more time or maybe money behind it, it could have done so much more. The bones of this game are very good. Now, the game centers around a very similar mechanic as to the early Assassin's Creed games or the Batman Arkham series, where you have your basic attack, you have a parry, and then you have a dodge. And then you have some small special abilities that you can utilize that don't really change up the gameplay too much, but they add a little bit of oomph to your powers and the things that you can normally do. It has a super similar setup to those games that I named previously, where if someone is trying to attack you with a blue attack, you need to parry that. If someone's hitting you with a red one, you need to dodge. But otherwise, you can smash square and just keep on hitting them until you break their kind of stamina meter. And then once you break that meter, then you can kill them. Which, let me clarify, this is all fake killing. You do not actually kill anyone in this game. So it is a pretty family-friendly game. All of the characters are lighthearted, goofy, fun, and constantly just have little remarks that they say even after they die. It's pretty hilarious to kill an entire zone of enemies and kind of run by a group of bodies, and one of them spout off some nonsense to you. Like, oh hey, I thought I was supposed to be dead. What's going on here? Like, one of them will randomly say something about how the ground is really hard, something like that. Like, it's hard to breathe when they're laying on their face. The comedy and the gameplay is what makes this game what it is. Now, a little bit of frustration that I had with the gameplay before I get more into the comedy and other aspects of it, the rock, paper, scissors mechanics are not meshed together very well, and I think it's mostly because of the enemies that come with those. There is a good bit of enemy variety behind it, but each one goes to attack you, and they don't have any rhyme or reason behind their attacks, but whenever they do attack you, sometimes they sort of combine their attacks to hit you all at once. And the bad thing about that is the game doesn't have any sort of input delay where you can parry and then dodge and parry back to back. Instead, if an enemy is hitting you with something that you have to dodge and another one is hitting you with one that you have to parry, the first button that you press will happen and then the other one will hit you. So no matter what, if there are two enemies or more hitting you with a different type of attack, you're gonna get hit. Now, the only solution that I found to resolve this is dodge everything. Now, this sort of sucks because the enemies who require the parry mechanic, sometimes you have to kind of break down their stamina meter, and if you don't, they rebuild it, which requires you to parry them each time that they attack you. So if you dodge instead of parry, their stamina meter zooms right back to the top. And that's a little bit frustrating. And especially in a group of like 5 different enemies where none of them will die because they constantly do different attacks and their stamina meters are regenerating, and yeah, it gets frustrating. Now, overall, if the NPCs had better dynamic flow to their combat where they would kind of come at you one at a time to a degree, I know that's kind of dumb, but it's been done in other games and it works well. And if they had this better flow to it, that I feel like I would have been a lot more positive on the game overall. But as it stands with those frustrations with combat, because of how basic the abilities were and how the enemies kind of just came at you non-stop, hitting you with the different attacks, not allowing you to properly combat them, I've got to give it some dings for that. But moving on to the comedy of this game. The comedy is a highlight. Everything in the game is written very well, and it is very funny. Now, it's closer to a childish funny. It does have a super similar vibe to like Shrek and the Puss in Boots movie, which was a pretty good movie. It had a lot of good funny moments, and this game does as well. The voice acting done with all of the puns that they constantly pull off throughout the entire game are so well executed. Definitely listen to all of the dialogue that every character is saying because it's worth it. Now, leading into progression. There is none, so there's not a lot to talk about there. And I think that's a little bit disappointing because you get these powers throughout the game, you kind of progressively get them, but they don't really do anything special. You get one that's an AoE that kind of knocks everybody down, or you get a big straight line hit, or you get a kick. And they all kind of do similar things. They are a little bit different and situational, but more or less they're all kind of the same. And when it comes to that progression and not allowing those powers to become better or getting a better weapon or whatever it may be, it takes the minor aspects of adventuring from this game where you maybe would search throughout the environment for a collectible or an upgrade directly out of it, because there's basically none of that. There were multiple instances where it looked like I could go off of the beaten path and go into a slightly hidden area, and I would, and there would be nothing every single time. And one thing that I forgot to mention a little earlier is the kick mechanic. This game centers around kicking people or kicking objects into people as part of the stun mechanic. Now, it's pretty novel whenever you first do it, but it just gets very repetitive and then not as fun as the game progresses because nothing changes and it just gets old. So the kicking mechanic, although it is interesting and fun to begin with, because it doesn't go anywhere or change, gets very boring very fast. Now, the game's graphics are very pretty. There wasn't any spots where I looked at something and was like, oh, this looks terrible. The fidelity of this is not great, but it did look a lot like Fortnite. And I say that with love, but man, am I tired of that art style. There are a ton of games out there trying to mimic that, and this one does it very closely to the Fortnite style that it kind of bothered me. Others might not find it as grating, but for me, I was getting sick of it by the end of the game. But other than the art style itself, the world is richly detailed. They constantly give you new and exciting things to look at or traverse through, and for that, it's done well. Speaking of traversing, there is a little bit of platforming mechanics in between some of the fights. They're not anything special. You swing on a pole, you jump onto a bouncy platform, or you grab onto a box. Either way, you're just kind of going up, 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 or going across, across, across. And it's all very basic. Some people might find that good. Me? Boring as shit. I wish it had more. I wish there was something different about it. I wish that it was more engaging and I didn't just jump and my character did the mechanic. I wish there was a little bit more. But it did help break up the combat in the world. So if it wasn't there, I feel like the game would have been even more linear and been so much lesser. So having those little breaks in combat, allowing for some environmental traversal mechanics, I'm okay with. I'm glad that it's there and it served its purpose. Now onto the audio and music of it. Again, the voice acting in this is amazing. I don't know if they got professionals to do this, but goddamn did they do a good job. The way that they exaggerate every tone and every pun that they're throwing out there at you is done to perfection. All of the little noises that your characters and the other characters make throughout it, whether it's quippy little remarks or the ting of your sword as you go ting 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 as you're fighting somebody, it's all very crisp. The music is in the background and it crops up every once in a while and it does what it needs to do, but it's not overwhelming and it's not missing either. So I think it's done a good job where I was never in the moment saying, man, I wish there was more music, or man, I wish there was less music because it's overwhelming, which does sometimes happen in games. And yes, I'm talking about you, Metaphor Refantasio. Sometimes less is more. But I think that's going to be the end of this review, so overall, On Guard, not a bad game. I went into it expecting a bit more from the combat and a little bit more progression from everything, but it's a lighthearted, fun time with good bits of comedy throughout. It is better in some aspects that I expected and worse in others. Either way, if you can find this game for maybe less than full price, I would say jump on it, but if you're just wanting a goofy little fun good time that takes you roughly 3 to 4 hours to complete, then go for it. Jump on this and you won't be disappointed, but maybe don't expect the world from it. And with that, I will see you next time.